Legal Aid of North Carolina. Legal Aid of North Carolina has several offices statewide, and we handle cases in all 100 counties. We handle a variety of kinds of cases in various priority areas, including family law cases such as domestic violence and custody, public benefits such as Social Security, disability, and food stamps, and housing cases. Housing cases are actually the second highest priority in terms of the amounts of cases that we get, right behind domestic violence cases. With respect to housing cases, our focus is to make sure that people are living in safe and affordable homes. That can involve both public and subsidized housing cases as well as private landlord-tenant cases. Our public and subsidized cases involve admissions to or eviction from public and federally subsidized housing. It also involves termination of subsidies like Section 8 vouchers. With respect to private housing cases, we handle things like self-help cases where perhaps a landlord has put someone's furniture out on the lawn or turned off the water or the heat. We also handle habitability cases, deciding whether a place is actually fit for another human to live in that place. And then evictions from mobile homes, and even some hotel cases as well, evictions from hotel cases also. We do have a fair housing prong to the work that we do, and we actually partner with the City of Winston-Salem in many ways on that work. But our focus today is really going to be on the types of housing cases that we handle that are landlord-tenant based. If you want to learn more about the full spectrum of cases that we handle, feel free to visit our website at www.legalaidnc.org, or anyone who's interested in our services can contact our helpline at 1-866-219-LANC. Again, 1-866-219-LANC or 5262. So I want to focus on the reason why we're involved in this training today. It involves trying to have a way to resolve landlord-tenant disputes in something other than involving a judge and having testimony and having an adversarial process. If you're watching this video, it's because you've answered the call. You are a law student or perhaps a pro bono attorney in town who's decided that you'd like to give your talents to this process. When you really think about it, I really do believe that service is the rent that we pay for our time here on earth. That quote comes from someone who's an inspiration to me, Shirley Chisholm. But the point of today is to really get into how you can help out in this process of having landlord-tenant mediations. As we can all acknowledge, it is so important to try to avoid evictions if possible. Evictions have far-sweeping effects on any community where there are high numbers of evictions. I like to call it the scarlet E. If you have that scarlet E on your forehead, if everyone knows that you've had an eviction in your past, it can be an absolute barrier to you having any type of safe and affordable housing in the future. And that can be for not just individuals, but for whole families. In fact, the reality is, if you have children in your family, you are more likely to be evicted from your home. So I want everyone to understand the importance of trying to avoid evictions if possible, and for even landlords to understand, and I'm sure that they do in many cases, the benefits of trying to resolve your case, something short of and not involving an adversarial process. At this point in the training, you may have heard quite a bit already about landlord-tenant mediations, landlord-tenant law, the importance of being a neutral person involved if you are the mediator in a landlord-tenant mediation. What I'd like to do is to focus on actually the financials that are sometimes involved in these kinds of cases. Obviously, if a landlord files for summary ejectment, there's going to be court costs, administrative court costs, because the landlord actually filed that action. There could be unpaid bills that are involved that are now a lien on the property, repairs and cleaning costs, unpaid rent, a security deposit may be somewhere hanging in the balance. And then there's also late fees that could also be involved. And I know that you've probably learned a little bit about the limits on late fees in these kinds of cases. But what's important to understand is that the financials can often be the leverage that you're going to have as this mediation is going forward. And it can often be the sticking point or the reason why the parties are where they are in front of you as the mediator. And what I'd like to talk a little bit about is just the different kinds of financial settlements that you can work through to hopefully get the parties to agree to something other than actually taking their case to court. landlord-tenant mediations that involve financial disputes, there can be a whole host of reasons why a tenant may not pay their rent. It could be because there's an emergency, such as a car repair, or there could be a job loss. And under normal circumstances, these types of reasons for not paying rent really are not a defense. But when you have a situation where there can be a crisis going on, such as what we have going on in this day and time, I think even a landlord can sometimes in those situations understand and agree that something is better than nothing. Some amount of rent is better than nothing, especially for a tenant who perhaps had paid their rent very diligently before the crisis. So when you're involved in a mediation, you want to make sure that you try to figure out what the two parties want. Some of the things that they could try to agree to is that, for example, the tenant could agree that they're going to pay the back rent over time, or they're going to make sure they pay their rent on time for a certain period, especially if they were able to do so before the crisis. A landlord may decide that they're not going to raise the rent for a certain period of time, or that they won't collect all of the back rent that a tenant may owe. What's most important is to just remember that you're there to figure out what the parties really want and try to come to an agreement that they both can agree to, because if they agree to it, they will likely follow it. There'll be some discussion about the importance of reducing it to writing and making sure that it's enforceable as much as possible. But just understand that there is a whole host of things that could probably come up when you're talking about the financials, and you're there to just listen and to make sure that you understand what those financials are and how they're going to impact that mediation. If you've ever found yourself in a small claims court on a summary ejectment action, one of the things that you'll realize is that a lot of times the cases are resolved literally in the back hallway, not necessarily so much in the courtroom. This process that we are creating here is a way of making that a little bit more official by having landlord-tenant mediations. But as legal aid attorneys, one of the things that we often realize is that you do need some leverage. And when you have a client who has tried their best to pay their rent but just fell short because of things like I mentioned before, job loss and so on, it can be a tricky situation because you do want to be able to have something to negotiate with the landlord. We did recognize that as one of the things that we would really need if we were ever going to be successful in any kind of eviction diversion or mediation process with respect to landlord-tenant cases. We have a really exciting new opportunity that was created out of crisis, out of the COVID-19 crisis. Fortunately, one of the things that was realized was that when people were calling the United Way's 211 number, one of the biggest numbers of calls that they got was for evictions from hotels and motels and other types of evictions. And it's because those types of workers were most severely impacted, restaurant workers and so on, that tend to actually take advantage of this kind of housing. And you realize how important it is to be able to have some level of funding to be able to fill the gap so that people can have some funds to negotiate with the landlord. United Way, the City of Winston-Salem, and the Winston-Salem Foundation, among other community institutions, actually awarded us $100,000 to be able to use those funds to actually negotiate some of these settlements. We are now able to pay up to 2 weeks of rent per se at a hotel or motel, but we're also able to find more creative ways to be able to negotiate some of these disputes and provide some level of funding or funds to the landlord to help resolve the dispute. So if you do come into contact with a legal aid attorney and a legal aid client, know that that could be something that is part of the process as well in the negotiation. And so in closing, I do want to thank you for your time and for your effort in being a part of this process. And I hope that you've learned some more about the services that legal aid provides, the availability of funds in mediations when we are involved in those cases. And I absolutely commend you for answering the call and for deciding to do what you could to help out.